Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Elemental Shaman 1 week into the PTR cycle for 10.2. Just a little disclaimer before we get going, just make sure that you're paying attention to when this video is posted, because if you're watching this in the future, odds are something has already changed. The PTR is always constantly molding and changing, and they're adding new things to it, so this is more of just an update for where we are right now, but not necessarily where we're going. Try not to get too doom and gloom about any kind of numbers or anything like that. We're really going to be trying to focus more on like playstyle and kind of almost like a feedback type video, at least for me personally, on like how I'm feeling about Elemental Shaman. But just as far as like numbers and how we relate to other classes, that stuff is going to change constantly throughout the PTR cycle, and we can kind of talk about how it is right now, but don't expect that to be where it ends up. There's been times in the past where a class has been doing terrible, and then they do that last minute tuning pass towards the end of the PTR cycle, and a class can go from being completely awful to being either middle of the road or actually being super meta. So, you know, we can kind of hold our final judgments on that until later on in the PTR cycle. So don't get too doom and gloom yet. We're just going to be talking about how things are right now in this moment. So with that being said, we're going to move on. We're going to start off with rating. As I said in my previous video about the 2 and 4 piece, it does seem that the Further Beyond build seems to be our best single target build. And that might sound good to you, because if you've kept up with this at all, you know that the Further Beyond build basically has permanent ascendance once you get going with it. And as long as you can keep a good uptime, you can pretty much maintain ascendance indefinitely. And it does have good single target, competitive single target, definitely probably on the higher end of things right now, but it's nothing crazy. If you hear permanent ascendance and think that sounds broken, it's really not even broken, and there's a ton of problems with it. It doesn't really have good AoE. You can get away, like if you take, you do have kind of one free talent point that you could take for Liquid Magma Totem to get out some extra flame shocks that you could then, you know, combo with Primordial Wave, get a little bit of burst of damage there. You can get fairly decent damage, it seems, with just Lava Beam spam, but it's really hard to set up specifically for that, and it really has no damage outside of the Ascendance window. If you're not in Ascendance, you're basically doing tank damage, and you really just are just praying to be proccing DRE to get in it. And if you get any kind of like mechanic that pulls you off of the boss for too long in certain situations, you can fall out of Ascendance, and then you're back to relying on that RNG to get back into Ascendance. On top of that, you're only pressing 2 buttons. You're only pressing Lava Burst and Elemental Blast for that Further Beyond proc to keep yourself in Ascendance, and then you will also press Primordial Wave. But other than that, that's pretty much all you're pressing once you get into Ascendance. You don't use the 4-piece bonus at all of the current tier piece, or the current tier set, so I don't think it's going to stay that way just for that alone. I don't think Blizzard's going to allow us to have a 4-piece tier set that we just don't use in single target, so I think something will definitely change there. But just the whole playstyle is incredibly boring, and having the reliance on RNG procs to even get going in the first place just feels really bad. Anytime like you can't make up for a difference with your skill, it just feels bad, especially when it's something as powerful from going from tank damage to doing fairly good single target damage. So it's not a build that I really enjoy at the moment. Your fingers will definitely get tired pressing whatever your Lava Burst button is over and over and over and over again. There are some other builds that I'll talk about as well. The Razagath build that we use, obviously, by its namesake, we use that on Razagath, is probably the best mix in terms of like lightning and fire, which is kind of what I think they were going for with this 2 and 4-piece set. The 2 set being more focused on like the fire side with Primordial Wave, and the 4-piece trying to incentivize you using Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning. So trying to marry those two things together. And the Razagath build does this fairly well in terms of like just the general playstyle. You're happy when you get the DRE proc, but it's not necessary for the build to actually function. And then the other build that we have is we're calling it the A-Bomb Shock build, or the Abomination build, because it's essentially a lightning-based build that we just slap on a Primordial Wave, and that does actually affect its playstyle. I'm not too comfortable with it yet, and I don't have much good footage of me using it, but it has a ton of movement. And it does do it's basically right at the same level as the Raz build. The Raz build might be slightly better in single target, but the A-Bomb Shock build also has the best AoE of any of the builds that we've seen so far. Probably better than Pure Wildfire as well. Wildfire build, we'll get into Mythic Plus a little bit later, but Wildfire build does have its problems too, though it did fairly well on the Council boss that we saw, so that might be something that we also see in the mix in rating moving forward. But though I like I said, I think that a lot of things are going to change. One of the big things about like in a raid environment about that 4-piece is it just doesn't do enough damage to ever actually incentivize you using it. The A-Bomb Shock build does use it for its rotation. Part of the burst window for the A-Bomb Shock window, or for the burst window, does incorporate it, but it's not like it's the end of the world one way or the other. It does get some usage out of it, but at the end of the day, the 4-piece is just incredibly weak. So I highly expect to see some changes at the very least to the 4-piece build, but the 4-piece set. But one of the problems there is the more you buff it without changing the way it works at all, the more you're starting to incentivize actually just playing lightning builds. So it's one of those things that even if you were to buff the lightning bolt portion of the 4-piece, it's not going to suddenly make you start wanting to press it more in a Further Beyond build, or specifically for the Further Beyond build. It's just not going to make you want to press that, but it will make the other builds, the Razagath build and the A-Bomb Shock build, become more relevant. And maybe that's a good thing. It just depends on what kind of playstyle you prefer. But going back to the Further Beyond build and just some of the issues with it, it's not what we want. That's not where we really want to be at if you enjoy a skill-based gameplay at all. Now, I will say there are things that they could do to make this a little better. I honestly think Further Beyond just is too big of an issue from a design standpoint to constantly be keeping yourself in ascendance like that. It's just, when you boil down the talents basically to just giving you a 2-button spec, it just kills a lot of the interest in the spec, in my opinion. And that's one of the problems with the fire talents in general. I made a video about this back in 10.0 about all the issues with Elemental Shaman, how they were basically all revolving around DRE, and pretty much all the points for the fire side of the tree revolves around 2 buttons. It revolves around your Flame Shock doing more damage or helping you out more, or buffing up your Lava Burst. And it really doesn't like try to interweave any of your other abilities except for those 2 things. So that's one of the biggest issues with the tree. So it's really hard to like fix it just by them doing small things. One thing that like I said, I think that they should just kind of get rid of Further Beyond and maybe move Ascendance down to its place, so that you can take DRE and Ascendance. That would allow you to still have those times where you can get into Ascendance reliably, get some good bursts out of Ascendance. You would need to tune up Ascendance a little bit more. And then you'd probably, in order to have any kind of gameplay and not do tank damage outside of it, I don't know, maybe buff Flux Melting. Flux Melting is something that has not had any kind of real usage this entire expansion. We've taken it before for the single target builds in Vault of the Incarnates, but we weren't really using it to weave with our Lava Burst. It was just you get a little bit more damage out of your next Lava Burst, but you weren't ever actually planning around it. I feel like Flux Melting could easily be buffed from 20% to 50 or even 70. I don't know what the exact number would need to be, but that could easily be buffed up so we could actually maybe start doing some damage outside of the Ascendance window. That's really just the problem. I think permanent Ascendance is just not a good style of play, and it shouldn't be so RNG based. I don't know what they need to do. That's just some, spitballing suggestions, but that's kind of the issue with it right now. So that's pretty much it for single target and rating in general. We're doing, fine. We're kind of middle of the road. If we are just pure single target, Elemental can do good amount of damage right now, but again, that's with that Further Beyond build that I don't expect to stay around, at least not in its current form and function. Moving into Mythic Plus, like I said before, the A-Bomb Shock build seems to be the best Mythic Plus build that we have at the moment. There is it's basically kind of like a lightning build playstyle, like I said, with the Primordial Wave slapped on. It's basically the only thing that gives us that ability to bring single target to a Mythic Plus environment, and that's kind of our biggest issue. The biggest problem with Wildfire right now is it just has no single target. The Wildfire build was very propped up by the Vault of the Incarnates 2-piece, which just buffed our spinning ability, our spinders, by I think it was either 20 or 25%. It was a ton of damage, and we just don't have that anymore. So Wildfire feels even worse than it did in Season 1. It can still do okay AoE. One of the other problems with the PTR right now is the dungeons are either incredibly overtuned or undertuned, depending on which ones. Like a Tal Dazar is insanely easy, even like on a 20. Things just fall over, and then you have things like Dawn of the Infinite, which you're falling over almost instantaneously. So it'll take some time to get some real feedback on Mythic Plus, I think, just because every group seems to have an Outlaw Rogue in it right now, and Outlaw Rogue is just destroying everything it touches with their new rework. So it's kind of hard to get some real solid information on Mythic Plus, but I think it is fairly obvious that Wildfire is just really fallen behind in terms of its single target damage. Can still do AoE, but it would really struggle in a Mythic Plus environment without being able to pull mobs onto bosses and be able to kind of cleave while you're trying to kill the boss at the same time. So you don't really need to do that with the A-Bomb Shock build because it actually brings decent single target already and can still do AoE. But if you don't like the lightning builds now, I mean, one good thing about the A-Bomb Shock build is you don't necessarily need to take Echoes of the Great Sundering. So if you don't like that talent and you do like Earth Shock, then maybe you'll like this better. I haven't got enough time to practice it. I don't have much good footage with it either, especially not in Mythic Plus. But it might be better than the Lightning build for you. I've gotten so used to the Lightning build that it feels fine, and I'm playing this for the first time, and I'm still getting used to how it feels. But maybe it'll turn out okay. You're not really using the Primordial Wave as an AoE ability in this build, so it's kind of weird. It's kind of mainly just for your single target, and then you're basically just Chain Lightning and Earthquaking in AoE. You're basically using 2 buttons in that sense for Mythic Plus. So that's kind of what it is at the moment. I don't think there's any reason to doom one way or the other, but I do think there is reason to expect changes. So if you're really on board with the Permanent Ascendance, I would not get too attached to it. I just don't see them wanting to keep something where our 4-piece is just completely ignored. And I also just personally don't think it's healthy gameplay to be so reliant on procs in order to do damage. It's just, in my opinion, it's not necessarily fun to play. And even on Council, when you had permanent 3 targets, you would think that that would be a really good build for a 3-target spread cleave situation. And I just wasn't really, especially compared to single target, the damage just wasn't there for 3-target spread. But again, like I said, numbers can change. The other thing I know I say, like, in one sentence, I'll say, like, numbers don't matter and expect those things to change. And then I start talking about how they relate to other classes. The other thing is, you shouldn't be expecting a build that has permanent ascendance to get tuned upward. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if you're expecting it to get tuned up, I think you're crazy. The only direction this build is going to go is down. And there's been enough data on it at this point that I think that we'll definitely see some changes somewhere. I just don't know what they're going to do, because the biggest problem there is, like I said earlier in the video, the entire right side of the tree is just too cluttered with too many talents. And fire builds are so strapped for points as it is, and they all revolve around Lava Burst in some way. So they would have to do a lot of tinkering in order for it to be, usable and not feel so terrible to pick lava builds and not feel so strapped for talent. So we'll see what they end up trying to do. I'm looking forward to doing more testing, but we'll just have to wait and see. I think we're going to probably see some new builds emerge once they do some messing around here, but we'll have to just wait and see on that. But that's pretty much it for right now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you want to keep your ear to the ground as best you can to be on the lookout for changes, feel free to join the Elemental Shaman Discord channel in the Elemental Shaman Discord, which is Earth Shrine, so I'll have a link to that down below. I hang out there all the time, and that's where I get a lot of my information in terms of what's changing, how is that going to affect us. So if you're really interested in this kind of stuff, feel free to go check out the Discord. If you have any personal questions for me, I have my Discord as well down below. And if you're interested in any of the raid testing, I do all of this live. I'm planning on trying to do every single one of the raid testings, and I do that live at Twitch at twitch.tv/Ridmark. So feel free to give me a follow there as well if you're interested in the actual testing. But other than that, guys, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you in the next video.